Hello everyone, my name is Barbara Myslik and I will be your guest lecturer for today. I will be talking to you about Poland because that's where I'm from. And this is why your teacher decided that I will be a good person to talk to you about that. Along with my professional experiences, I hope that I can tell you a little bit about public relations in Poland, how it's practiced, a little bit about cultural differences between Poland and the US, and try to explain to you, doing my best, how would practice of public relations look differently in my country versus United States. Let me start by telling you a little bit about myself. I have got my undergraduate degree and my master's degree from sociology from Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland, which is one of the oldest universities in Europe and the oldest universities in Poland. And after I moved to the US, I got my second master's in communication from University of California, Davis. Afterwards, I have been teaching at a variety of community colleges in California, in San Francisco Bay Area. And then I have moved to Gainesville to get my PhD in mass communication and journalism, where I specialize in public relations. As you can see, I don't have a degree in public relations per se. However, I have worked briefly in a boutique PR agency in Poland, and I have also worked in a large advertising agency in Poland right after democratic transition. And the reason why I consider that experience relevant to what we'll be talking about today is because, as you learned from your book, and as I will definitely confirm, at the beginning, public relations, marketing, advertising were very connected to each other, were considered within the same industry in Poland. So oftentimes it was the advertising agencies that were the first pioneers or the first houses for public relations practice before international or corporate public relations firms came into the market. What I want to talk to you about today is some things that maybe your book didn't quite mention or isn't explaining in as much detail as I can myself. I think your book did a really good job describing development of public relations industry in Poland and describing the relationship between the media and public relations practitioners. Some things that I would like to talk to you about is I would like to spend some time sort of filling out the different aspects of Polish culture that were mentioned in your book and that are discussed or visible in Hofstede Cultural Dimensions when speaking about Poland. But my goal will be to make those a little bit more applicable to you in terms of what these might mean for public relations practice. So the few things I would like to start with is your book mentions 5 important factors that can be identified with Polish culture and that are very important in practicing public relations and really any business in this country. And 3 of those I found particularly relevant, and I would like to spend a little bit of time telling you about those. One is the distinctive features of Polish culture. The other one is the influence of Catholic Church. And the final one is the loss of statehood. The loss of statehood, in my perception as a person who lived most of my life there, overlaps with the legacy of the communist system to a certain degree. And the reason why I say that is because they both relate to a very strong sense of Polish national identity that is rooted partially in the fact that this identity was threatened by many years of Polish history. But before we get there, let's talk about the distinctive feature of Polish culture. What I think is a really good illustration of how that plays out in practice is another feature that you have in your book, which is the practical tips for foreign practitioners trying to communicate in Eastern European and Central European markets, which I would like to go over now and relate them back to the features I mentioned and how they specifically relate to Poland. The first one is learn the geography. Do not confuse old countries with new ones and do not mix languages. Yes, very much so. It is very, very true. And the reason why Polish people particularly are very sensitive about it is who we are most often confused with is Russia, which is our largest neighbor. It's one of the very few countries in Europe that are in eastern region of Europe that are internationally recognized. What I mean is everybody knows that Russia exists. Everybody knows where Russia is, at least vaguely. Not everybody really knows where Poland is. And very few people know that we no longer actually even border with Russia. We actually border with Ukraine, that used to be a part of Soviet Union. The reason why Polish people get very weird if you confuse them with Russian people is because, as you read in the loss of statehood part of your book, and as you learned from reading about communist rule, Russia in the first case and Soviet Union in the case of communism was the very source in both of the occupation times of our loss of statehood and endangerment of national identity. So, as much as Polish people are very tolerant and open to international contact and would never consider a particular individual Russian person a negative association, being confused for Russians or having our language confused for Russian is definitely a step onto that endangered national identity that was mentioned in your book. Another thing that this is something that I feel I can mention on behalf of Czech Republic and Slovakia, not necessarily Poland, but very, very relevant in that case, is Czechoslovakia was a country that was created after Soviet Union came to existence, after Second World War, where a lot of countries in Eastern and Central Europe became what was called a satellite country to Soviet Union, which means they were communist countries that in large degree were influenced or controlled more or less directly by Soviet Union. After 1989 and a lot of democratic transitions that were started in Poland and then continued with the fall of the Berlin Wall and then break of the Yugoslavia, Czech Republic and Slovakia became two separate national entities. What very often happens, and what I even experience on a daily basis living in the United States, is people telling me that they have been to Czechoslovakia. This country doesn't exist for almost 30 years now. And if you are from this country, you can definitely be very sensitive of being mixed up. When you think about this, if you're from United States, you want people to know that you're from United States. You don't want to tell them that you're from Canada. And it doesn't matter anyway, because it's all North America, right? You definitely like to think about your national identity as something that is tied to who you think as yourself. The second one is never use immigrants as translators. They have been out of their countries for decades, and the majority of them do not speak contemporary language, but the one spoken half a century ago. I agree with that. I consider that very relevant, especially with countries that went through a political transition. A lot has changed, and a lot has changed very fast. And a lot of things, especially in social realities, change very dynamically. When you think about this, in my not that long of a life altogether, living in Poland, I managed to live in a communist country. I managed to live in a new democracy, I witnessed Poland becoming a member of um, NATO forces. And finally, I witnessed Poland becoming a member of European Union, a large group of European countries that share certain economic and cultural um, commonalities. So I managed in the first 20 something years of my life live in four different versions, if you may, or incarnations of Poland. When you think of people who left Poland in 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s to escape the communist regime, these people being used as translators in the contemporary 2017 European Union Poland will indeed not be a very good um, witnesses to the current culture. Do not bribe, although it might look like everybody's doing it and that bribing might help you in the short run. In the long run, you are destroying the public trust you are going to need in the future. Particularly in the case of Poland, which is the case I know best, and that's why I'm going to focus on that rather than making generalizations about all Eastern and Central European countries. Um, Bribing is really no longer accepted practice in any business or professional settings in Poland. Sadly, and I will be the first one to admit that, but say that this is very sad. The two areas of social life where bribing is still considered not really accepted, but almost a necessary part of functioning is medicine and public administration, which means if you want to have a very good healthcare and if you want to get things done in public administrations really fast, get a building permit, get a particular license or anything like this, people still consider that a small gift or any token of appreciation, not necessarily cash, but something that shows the person in power that you are considering yourself indebted to them, is acceptable socially. However, public relations, business, advertising, what I consider new markets in Poland are absolutely no longer and never really were since their inception in any way acceptable arenas for bribing. Take people seriously and not as some natives in third world countries. Some of them are better educated than you are. I wish I could say that doesn't happen. Sadly, I have been asked by people in California whether we have universities, whether we have electricity, whether I am able to marry whoever I want, or was my marriage arranged, or was I bought. People, especially people who don't have a lot of exposure to foreign countries and foreign cultures, assume a lot of things that sometimes can be harmful to people that they assume those about. So make sure you definitely avoid that. One more that I wanted to mention out of the 9 practical tips is do not try to impress, the last one, number 9, do not try to impress with importing Westerners into the market itself. These times are gone. Use the locals. I would definitely agree with that. I would think that just because someone was educated in a foreign country or just because someone doesn't speak Polish as their first language, it is no longer legitimacy. It is no longer seen as qualifications in themselves. So if you are looking for people to staff your agency, if you are looking for people to manage local market, I would definitely recommend looking for people who are locally educated or who are based in Poland. Sometimes you might want to consider if you will be making these decisions or if you will be a part of the organization. Sometimes you might notice that, especially if a company is opening a branch or it is a fairly new development that a company is opening a branch in Poland, the CEO or someone who is a PR manager might be someone who is from the home country of the organization. So it might be an American if it's an American PR firm. It might be a British person if it's a company based in the UK. This is, however, not so much to suggest that local people lack competence. It is more to make sure that the norms and standards that are common to the whole corporations are implemented in the local market with consideration for local culture, but with staying true to their corporate assumptions. So this is really important. I would like to spend a few minutes talking about how Hofstede's cultural dimensions might play a role in you thinking of Poland as a place to do business, and of you thinking of Poland. As a place to practice public relations. And the three important dimensions I would like to focus on are indulgence, uncertainty avoidance, and power distance. Power distance, as you know, deals with people accepting hierarchy, people accepting that someone who's in power has certain privileges, and people creating or diminishing distance between themselves and their subordinates. US has a power distance of 40, which is less than 50%. Poland, however, has a power distance of 69, which is almost 70. What that means in practice is that if you are someone's boss in Poland, you can use this position with a certain degree of assertiveness and with a certain degree of obviousness in terms of power discrepancy. You can tell people that you want them to do something, or you can ask for something to be done by a certain deadline, and you don't necessarily have to hedge as much as an American boss might, or you don't necessarily need to spend as much time diminishing the seeming distance between the supervisor and the subordinates. However, what is very important to remember is with a greater power distance, to quote a famous comic book, also comes greater responsibility. And in Polish culture, what that means is that if your boss tells you to do something, you might not have a problem doing it because they're your boss. But also, if your boss disappoints you or acts in a way that you don't deem compatible with their power position, the judgment is that much harsher than it would be if you considered your boss your equal. So what you have to be very careful about if you are in a superior position in countries with high power distance is you need to make sure that you understand that as much as your position allows you for certain freedoms and allows you to sort of shortcuts certain niceties or certain social forms that American culture might force you to fulfill, it also puts you under much harsher scrutiny, and it also means that you are judged differently than people who would be considered your equals. The second dimension I would want to focus on a little bit is indulgence. Indulgence versus restraint means the idea that we deserve rest, the idea that we deserve fun, the idea that the hard work needs to be rewarded immediately or eminently, but at some point needs to be rewarded. United States has indulgence index at 68. All of the Eastern European countries, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Ukraine, has indulgence index between 28 and 29. there is a very clear discrepancy. What that means is that people in Poland don't necessarily think that they deserve to have fun or that they deserve to do things immediately after completing a task. However, coming back to what that might mean to you if you're doing business in Poland, it means that what they expect from themselves might be expected of you. So, for example, coming back to our situation that we discussed when we talked about being a superior or someone's boss, if you are doing business in those countries, you don't want to make an impression that you party all the time and want your workers to work all the time, because if you believe that you deserve rewards or rest or vacation because of your cultural indulgence index and the sense that this is something that is innate to the workforce, you, however, work with people who think that until the job is done or the task is completed, it is almost inappropriate to be flaunting your free time or doing something for fun. This might cause that judgment and that fact that you are treated differently as a boss to be even more harsh. And finally, the last factor that I wanted to mention is uncertainty avoidance. Uncertainty avoidance deals with to what degree are people of particular culture willing to put up with certain uncertainties, with things that aren't necessarily regulated. And what is interesting is United States ranks in uncertainty avoidance at 46%, which is, again, a little below 50%. Poland has the highest uncertainty avoidance of absolutely all Eastern and Central European countries, ranking 93. Czech Republic, to compare, is at 74, Slovakia is at 51. Only Russia, which is not really considered a Central European country, has uncertainty avoidance close to Poland at 95. What it really means is that Polish people do not have very high tolerance for uncertain things in society. That means that the rules of social behavior, of what is acceptable, of what is proper, of what is considered a business practice, needs to be followed. They are very important. They are considered part of culture. And in public relations, that means that, for example, a campaign that is doing something very unexpected, that is doing something that isn't necessarily understood within social norms, might not meet with a lot of enthusiasm because it doesn't follow the societal rules that are considered very important. And in Polish case, are going to be very rigid. I'm trying to think what else is really important in terms of differences of PR practice in Poland and in the US. I think definitely at the beginning, when I worked in public relations, the big difference was the lack of specialization. A lot of us were doing public relations work without really knowing that it's public relations quite yet. A lot of us were doing public relations work while being employed by advertising agencies. The idea of public relations at the inception of the discipline and profession in Poland was more about practice than profession. It was more about what we do than about what we call ourselves. So there was definitely a big difference. A lot of things that are happening in Poland are really new in terms of developing professional associations, in terms of ethics, in terms of research, in terms of corporate social responsibility, which is something that your text also mentions. Although it does change, and it does change very fast. I actually read that this year, two of the Platinum Awards that are awarded by PR Magazine were won by a Polish public relations agency, and one of them was won in category of education, and the other one was won in the category of pro bono campaigns. So it definitely changes very fast, and definitely Polish market was very strongly recognized this year for public relations practice. But it's definitely something that, like I said, when I was practicing PR, and I feel like still, um, is more of a pioneering work. A lot of practices of public relations and how to do that were brought with large foreign firms. So Poland really is just now starting to develop its own standards in terms of public relations practice that is adjusted to our cultural characteristics. Um, Another thing I wanted to mention is, while your book describes the media sector accurately in terms of foreign ownership and the fact that a lot of Polish people read newspapers, about 60% of the market still reads daily newspapers, that radio is very popular, that illiteracy is practically non-existent. Everybody in Poland can read and can comprehend. That makes media very powerful. That means that media have a true impact and reach to almost every member of society. However, what your book doesn't mention, and what I feel is important for you to know in terms of public relations practice in Poland, is that Polish media, while free and democratic and very pluralistic, is also very segmented in terms of political profile. What I mean by this is that Polish, particularly newspapers, but media in general, the same goes for television and radio, Polish media are very openly divided into three politically influenced sectors. One being very right-wing, nationalistic, Roman Catholic, conservative wing. One being very central and sort of striving for objectivity. And one being a more liberal, left-wing, meritocratic option, even though they are sometimes also accused of being pro-communism and pro-former government because of the leftist of the left-leaning opinions. Why is this important? Because as a public relations practitioner, if you organize a press conference in Poland, for example, you have to be prepared that depending on which media show up, the news that you will deliver will be interpreted or filtered through a political profile. So if you strive for thorough coverage, you have to make sure that you have media from each of the political leaning sectors. If you are striving to avoid a particular interpretation of the message, you might want to avoid inviting right-wing media. Depending on how you strive to promote your content or what you're doing or how you interact with the media, political profile is something that has to be considered when dealing with Polish media. It is really important. I'm looking at your short list here, trying to figure out if there's anything else I feel is really important when practicing public relations in Poland. We talked a lot about culture, which I think is really one of the most important variables in shaping interaction within the local markets and therefore shaping relationships, which is really what PR is all about. If you strive to build relationships, you have to understand the culture fundamentally. We talked about the Hofstede dimensions. We talked about beginnings of business, and we talked a little bit about how the media interaction is looking right now. I think the most important things are covered. If you have any particular questions related to Poland or related to Eastern Central European markets, I'm sure your teacher can share my email address if this is something that you would be interested in, and I can answer any additional questions you might have. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and I hope I was able to introduce my country to you a little bit better and help you understand how public relations practice is different in this particular country versus what we are used to seeing in other places in the world. Thank you so much.